Hi, and welcome to TiddlyWiki Hangout 107. I'm Jeremy Ruston, and I'm joined today by Matt Lauber. Hi, Matt, and Reece Shaw. Hi, Reece. Matt, do you
Hi.
want to go first as you're left on my screen?
All right.
Tell us where you are and a little bit about yourself.
All right. So I'm Matt Lauber. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the United States, and I'm a software developer by trade. I came by TiddlyWiki, I think about 5, 6 years ago. Prior to this, I was probably still doing stuff related to D&D at the time, putting stuff together. And I've done a little bit of work developing on it, as well as building some tools and a lot of wikis that I've used for running D&D games.
Excellent. It's great to have you here, Matt.
Thank
And
you.
Reece, hi. How are you doing? Would you like
Hi,
to do the same?
I am
Introduce.
doing better than now that I'm connected. My name is Reece Shaw. I live in Dayton, Ohio, in the United States as well. I started using TiddlyWiki about a year and a half ago when I was looking for a solution to keep track of things for my Pathfinder game, and I am a software support person by trade. So, funnily enough, I also use this for work sometimes as well.
Okay. Okay. So we should perhaps talk to people or make sure we address people who've no idea about D&D. So would you just give us a tiny bit of background? I mean, I know D&D is something that through its IT, I suppose, because it spins out a lot of IT. But of course, D&D started long before, and there are ways of doing it, I guess, without any computer support. But would you like to just help me through a bit of that?
All right, so D&D kind of started, I want to say in the 70s, and it's actually completely tech independent originally. It was basically a collaborative storytelling game where you've got people sitting together at a table, a couple of rule books that describe kind of how to adjudicate actions between various users, and then one person basically sets the scene, says, you guys are in a castle, that you need to get this thing from some guy over there, and there are things in your way. What do you want to do? How do you want to approach it? And the players kind of put together ideas of how they want to do things, try and accomplish things, and they'll roll dice to kind of adjudicate whether or not they can. And it's just a collaborative storytelling thing where you put together different stories as you continue to grow.
And they can take quite a long time. My understanding is it can be a multi-day process playing a game.
Yeah, it usually is kind of almost an ongoing thing where you'll get together for anywhere from like 3 to 6, 7. I know people who will do like 10-hour sessions with breaks in the middle, and they'll do it every week or every month or something, and just kind of come back and well, in this episode we are going to do this thing, or we are continuing the story from last week's episode. Reece, you got more to add to that?
Yeah. So, to that point, I think the longest session I've ever run was 11 hours. I guess it's almost like an episodic, akin to, or an episodic game akin to running. I guess people would enjoy Lord of the Rings or something, and then you would have a party of people, say between anywhere between 3 and 5 people, play out scenarios in a usually fantasy world. And there's other tabletop RPGs in order to be able to, like Matt said, have this collaborative storytelling thing. When I refer to Pathfinder, it's because I play a different version of what is essentially a fork of D&D
Okay.
that was created in the early 2000s. Because since D&D has been around since the 70s, there have been 5.5 iterations on the game, in addition to various splinters, using different rules, different dice sets, and stuff like that. So, personally, for me, I use my wiki to keep track of everything that I have in my custom world, because I am a human and not an encyclopedia, and it's a lot easier for me to keep track of characters and stuff if I have a wiki to be able to do that for me.
Yeah, you
That
said
kind
your custom world. Would you like to explain how? So you've made a custom world that other players also inhabit. How does that work?
Yeah, so there's two kinds of, I guess, modes of play, where I think the thing that people would be most familiar with, I'll go back to Lord of the Rings. If you were playing a game in Middle Earth, you have one person who is the game master or dungeon master, one of the terms used. And that person is in control of everything except for the players. So the other folks, like Matt and I, are probably both DMing most of the time, I would assume.
Yeah.
So we're taking control of everybody else, all of the non-main characters, more or less. And then the players, the people that are like actually interacting with the world, inhabit the space that you've created or the space that you're running in. Because some people use published adventures from companies like Wizards of the Coast for D&D in order to play in a world that's already been created. I'm a writer in my free time, so I created my own world for people to work in. That's kind of like a pirate black powder fantasy type thing.
And when you and so the other people that you're playing with, do you share the wiki that describes the world, or do you describe other artifacts, or do you share other artifacts created from the wiki?
For me, I use my wiki almost exclusively for myself. There's very rare occasions where I'll export tiddlers as HTML, flat HTML files and send them to players, because most of the information is from me, and then I'm reading from it to my players, because there's a lot of stuff that they won't necessarily know. That's just for me.
So it's a manual for you to use in the moment.
Manual, you said?
Yeah, manual, a guidebook. Or...
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a reference document almost for everything that I need to use while I'm running the game.
From my perspective, when I'm using it, I'll actually have two wikis. I have my private wiki where I keep all the notes about everything that's happening in the world. So, for example, in the example we keep going back to, Lord of the Rings, I'll have notes about like what is Aragorn up to, even though we're doing an episode that's all about Gimli. But I would also have a public wiki that basically only has the things the players have learned about the world. So like I'm creating this world, I'm describing what's going on in it, and I've got these things in my head about what's going to happen, what else is happening around the players that they don't know about yet that's going to come back, either like they'll work out for them or bite them in the back or something, and come back to it and basically be like, all right, I'll take the stuff that you've learned from my private wiki with only all my notes and put it into a public wiki that they can look at and research. And I also put like session notes of this is what happened last time into that.
So you make interactive updates to the public wiki.
Exactly.
Okay. Gosh, that's so interesting. So both of you, if I understand, you're both in this position where you're, I want to say, game. I don't know if that's the worlds that other people are playing in. Is that right?
I think you cut out a little bit there, but I think you said game masters for these worlds. And yeah, we're basically we're the guides. We're the ones who are, if you can think about it like a story, there's the characters in the story, and then there's the author. And we're the author who describes the whole world. And then the players pretend to be the characters in the world.
Sure. And you're also the narrator, the kind of omniscient.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see the appeal.
So
it's interesting that one of the differences then is that UMAP published this public wiki, and you're not doing that, Reece. So Reece is more like the classic TiddlyWiki extension of the brain thing. You said, I think, about not being human and needing to remember all this stuff. Whereas
I've thought about making a public one like Matt, but I like my players having an imperfect recall of what has happened, because it makes it a little more, I guess, natural, where I can help them along the way, but I expect them to keep track of things, because their information as non-narrators is going to be more imperfect than me having access to all of the information.
Mm-hmm. I guess the question for you, Matt, is how many of the players do you know look at the wiki, and is it possible for them to play the game without looking at the public wiki, or is it that do they
It's absolutely possible for them to play without the wiki. That it's not a typical thing that you would have in a normal D&D campaign. This is kind of something, because I know about this and I like playing with TiddlyWiki I've built. I know that a few of them tend to look at it for the previous session notes to kind of get it, because I'll write up basically the story of what happened last time. So it's not necessarily like facts or lists or numbers or anything, but it's like so-and-so killed the bugbear this way, and then they discovered that the Archduke was in fact corrupt.
Yeah.
And so it's a story that they can go back and read and be like, yeah, I remember that stuff.
The catch-up bit at the beginning of an episode of a Western.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'll usually try and get that written up, and then I'll publish it like a couple of days before the campaign or before the next session, so that people can get in, look at it, get a kind of refresher on what we did last time, and get caught up with the story.
Okay, well, I know that you both got stuff to show. Is there a kind of sequence that would make sense?
Well, let's start with Reece's wiki, because I know he talked about how he's not an encyclopedia, but the wiki that he was showing off earlier certainly looks like one. So I think it's a good idea to show exactly how much goes into being a dungeon master or a game master for D&D, and what all you need to know and how TiddlyWiki can help that.
Excellent.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'll have to tell my players to not watch this, because this has private information that they can't know of. So this is kind of the, I guess, splash page, for lack of a better term. I have a bunch of tabs with a bunch of different things, and the way that I organize my wiki, more or less, is split out by locations that the players can visit, characters that the players may meet, and organizations that either the players or the characters may interact with. So like a church or something would be either a location or an organization where it's, members of the church make up this organization, and then the players may interact with them. They may be evil or good, stuff like that. So a lot of my information that I use outside of the table to keep track of things is looking at my different characters. And this is just, actually, this isn't everybody I've used, but this is a very long list of just some of the characters that I have created, some of the characters that the players have interacted with, and some basic information about them. So in my game, when you refer to somebody's ancestry, that indicates what kind of creature they are. So in the case of your standard fantasy RPG, you run into humans. I've got a lizard folk here. There's some dwarves, and a lot of my mostly human-centric campaign. And then some other basic information. Origin is kind of where the character would be from, and culture is what they're used to. So all of this stuff, these are obviously all links. If I want to remind myself what the Iwi mana are, I can open that up. This is a culture that is available that I can select. And pulling back, actually, I created a test one of Matt here. So these characters, for me, I give a basic rundown of all of the information, because this kind of informs me how I describe the character. And I even have an age here. I'll get to that probably in a little bit. So I got tired of using the edit template for editing specific tiddlers. So instead of doing the slow open and close for editing those, this is a template that interacts with data in the background. So I can pull all of that information. I can write that Matt lives in Indiana. I'll link to that. And then I have some general notes about Matt. So when the players meet Matt in the game, then I can talk about the information that I need there. And this kind of way that I interact with the information in my wiki is repeated for both the locations and everything else. So real quick, I'll pull up my location tab, and we'll go to one of the places that the players have been. So I'll actually just pull it up here, since I know this is an area. And this is one of my locations, for instance. So players have been here before. If I'm describing them the city, I have a brief description, just bullet it out. This is something that I would read off to the players. I would write in case there's some people that they want to interact with. I have important NPCs that they can talk to, and then some just general information. And all of this is, of course, also listed in a just wiki text that's pulling from various points. So yeah, that's a lot of information in here. It does, like you said, it does look sort of like a encyclopedia, but that's kind of how my brain works. So that's the basics of how this all looks for me.
And what's so nice about having these wikis available is that you get a level of consistency in the game. You know that when you go back to Mirrorwell, you'll have all the details about Mirrorwell in front of you, and you'll just talk about the same town if the players come back to it again. Or, hey, they want to go talk to the mayor, and last time they talked to the mayor, they discovered that he enjoys bananas. So this time they go in there, and you'll remember that he enjoys bananas. Maybe the players will too, and will offer him a banana to get him on their good side or something.
Yeah. No, you make it sound a lot like the I think long-running TV shows have a kind of book that's similar to
Absolutely
characters and locations and stuff, and as you say, to keep track of the changes that that they need to reflect in the show.
And the thing I would add too is that, like, when you're putting together a TV show, you have a script writing session and then like a performance session. And so you have time kind of to look at a traditional document where you can scroll through and go find the neat details you need, because there's no rush on the script section necessarily.
Yeah, they're all leafing through their printouts, actually, aren't they? Yeah.
Probably something like that. But when you're sitting at the table describing things to players and they ask, hey, what does the mayor look like? Well, you need to know right then what the mayor looks like. You can't take 5 minutes to go, what did I say the mayor looked like last time? So it's really useful to have it as a wiki where you're like, we're in Mirrorwell, I've got that up. Oh, hey, the most important NPC is the mayor. Click on the link, I know exactly what he looks like immediately. The speed that you can get, the instantaneous response that you can get, and the consistency is really helpful.
Do you find, do either of you make new, I mean, you're inventing stuff, like say inventing a new place. Would you ever invent a place kind of live in the middle of the game, or would that always be something that you do in preparation for a session, if you see what I mean?
I do that all the time. And it's mostly because sometimes I don't prep and I just like, I'll just wing it this time around. And the way that works out for me most of the time is I will, I actually, this is a good way to demo this. I have a bunch of buttons that I can use here in my wiki. And so if my players get to an area where they're like in a new location and I need like either a new NPC or maybe a new like area that they're going to frequent, then I'm just going to pop one of these open, name the new NPC that they're interacting with, and then kind of go from here once I've created that information to be able to populate everything in here.
And you'll literally be doing that live during a game.
Yeah, usually while I'm talking and making up whatever I'm making up. So I'll be like, yes, this person that you're talking to is an apothecary that is a guy who is an elf, and just kind of walk down this list of drop downs that I have to make sure that I can be descriptive, or take about a minute to populate all of those drop downs as I'm making things up as I go.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that this kind of style of this creative style of just-in-time invention is perhaps only practical if you've got a tool like this to catch everything?
I used to run without a wiki a long time ago when I was in high school, which actually wasn't that long ago. And I had a piece of, I basically had a notebook that I kept track of. And the problem with running on paper, for me at least, is that if I am making quick notes about something, I'm less likely to be able to have that immediate recall that Matt was referring to. So when I come back to viewing the NPC that I've created, in this case, I've made you an apothecary elf, I'm going to remember what I said about this character, or in the case of a location, then I would remember about that location as well, in a way that I wouldn't be able to search for something on my paper notes.
Yeah, if you have paper notes, then when somebody asks, "Oh, what did Jeremy do again?" you have to flip through your notes a bit to try and find that information so that you can be like, "Yeah, he was an apothecarian." And so,
But I assume that there is a kind of methodology, nonetheless, for doing a lot of what you're doing on paper. Some kind of, just as there is for getting things done, there are systems that don't rely on software, and then we can map them onto software. I mean, is there a world of players who actually Luddite players who refuse to use technology and want everything written in?
Absolutely.
I would say the vast majority. I would say the vast majority of people are. I would say so. Any pre-made worlds, like if you want to play in somebody else's world, is published as a book, a hardcover book with actual paper where you're flipping through trying to find stuff. So I'm kind of looking at TiddlyWiki, and as I build things in it and play with it and use it for my campaigns, to eventually get to the point where I could actually publish a module, as it's called, a world in TiddlyWiki where people can actually use it and be like, I have all this stuff right here. I don't have to flip through a page ever again. I don't have to have little bookmarks sticking out of my book on where any of the NPCs I think my players might meet are, where any of the locations they might go to is, any of the monsters they might run into are. I don't have to have that.
That's very interesting. Do you think that if I think of the relationship between conventional publishing and fan fiction, which, as I understand from the world of fan fiction is enormous, which wasn't apparent to me. But is there a similar relationship between the established, what would be the world, published D&D books and what you're doing, being like fan fiction, being like this much faster moving, evolving kind of cultural movement that perhaps starts out on the fringes, but perhaps takes over?
It really varies, and I think there's like for instance, there's a really popular web show called Critical Role that popularized D&D to a much wider audience. That's a group of people playing Dungeons and Dragons online on video, and they're all voice actors. So that when that kind of popped off and got more popular, the world that the DM for that game created has been published by Wizards of the Coast for other people to play in. So the reactivity of worlds that are created and people playing in them is it evolves very quickly.
It goes back and forth too. Things that like you start out creating for yourself and your group may get published out and you'll let other people use, and then other people will make changes to it and you'll pull it back into your world and be like, that was a good idea. I like that NPC they created.
Is there a central place where people exchange worlds? That sounds like such a funny sentence, but where you could go and put a world up and say, I mean, I guess, yeah.
There's various websites and places where people will congregate. I know World Anvil is like an online solution to like wiki keeping, which I had used for a little while. A lot of people just share stuff on internet forums like Reddit for like all of the sub forums for playing tabletop RPGs. It really there's no one central place. It's very organic in the way that stuff kind of spreads around the internet.
I would say that with the latest version of D&D that had been published, Wizards of the Coast, the company that kind of owns the copyright for all of D&D, or at least the official Dungeons and Dragons stuff, has a website called DM's Guild where you can actually publish stuff that as a product that can be bought. So like you can make money making D&D worlds, sort of thing. So.
That's kind of, I was wondering if there would be economic activity underpinning it all. How interesting. Matt, I'm conscious we've not seen your screen share. So perhaps it might be a good moment.
I'll go ahead and kind of go through some of the stuff that I've built, because I've built a lot of stuff that I use for running the game at the table. So when we talk about running the game, what that kind of means is that to adjudicate actions to decide whether or not like you managed to successfully beat the monster that comes to get you or something, you roll dice to do that. And there's lots of things that are lots of rules about how the dice rolls worked. Basically, how strong is this monster? What kind of weapons does it use? What kind of attacks does it make? And all that kind of stuff. So I'll go ahead. Let's see, which one do I want? I'll start with this one. And so if I'm looking at my wiki, I'll have something like, okay, I've got my sessions that have already happened. I can go look at like what actually happened in the story I wrote about it. And then I've also got stuff like that I use during the game at the table. So I've got my locations, and then I'll have an encounter where I have monsters that are fighting the players, and I can add them to the thing and see, okay, what spells can they do? They can cast a spell and see exactly what they're doing, or what attacks can they make. And I've got all the details for this entire creature stat block of what attacks it makes and all that kind of stuff built into it. And so
that's great.
I ended up basically taking a lot of time and kind of putting together a lot of data into a couple of plugins that I have for what all the spells that have been created in Dungeons and Dragons in the 5th edition. And you got the details on what they do and now how they work and all that stuff. And that's useful because in the books, this stuff isn't necessarily with the monster here. It wouldn't necessarily be right there. I'd have to flip through the book to get to the back of the book to find the right spell. And so it's hard to use spells at the table because I don't know what they do. I have to memorize 200 spells, and I'm not going to do that. So having it available right here where I can just click on it and find what it does makes it really useful. And then the other thing that I built here is this tool, which basically lets me track, okay, let's say you guys are fighting, I don't know, let's go with 3 veterans. I can see exactly, let's see, where did veterans go? You can see there's a lot of different things that they could be fighting. And I can see, okay, my player Juniper decided to attack veteran 1 and did 8 damage to it. I can keep track of that here. I can make a note, oh, this one has disadvantage on attacks or something.
Yeah.
Or whatever kind of details I need to put on that. And it gives me a way to, at the table, keep track of things I would normally be writing down on a piece of paper. I'd have a little sheet of paper where I'd just be like V1, V2, V3, and I'd write down like their HP at the start and then just keep trying to do the math in my head and writing down the subtraction and everything. And this gives me, but I wouldn't have all the details about like, okay, what does a veteran do? Oh, a veteran makes 2 longsword attacks. I didn't remember he did 2 of them.
That, it looks really good. Does that match the formatting of the books?
It is very close. So this is actually using HTML templates, I think is what it's called. It's some kind of a fancy like HTML4 or something feature that I actually grabbed off of a different website and just kind of like, I'm going to pull that in here because it makes things look really nice. And so it gives me a way to kind of keep track of what all these things actually do. And then if I want to create a monster or change a monster, I have a separate edit wiki or edit page as well that has its own edit template where I can actually fill in each of these different fields.
That's really cool.
So yeah, it was definitely a bit of a complex process getting all this set up because, well, it's just lots of little pieces. But having put it together and then gotten all the data from a different website loaded in here, it makes it really easy because I can go, oh, I want to add a troll to this encounter. And now I've got the exact 2 monsters I need for the players to fight. Their details right in front of me. I know what they do, how to use them, and I don't have to flip through a book or anything for that kind of stuff. And I can also put in details like, okay, this takes place in a cave. And I'll be able to see that as well as all of my creature notes. And you can kind of see how it's working there when you look at it, because you can see I've got all these different fields where I'm indexing by creature number and keeping track of like what nodes go on it and what their HP is and all that kind of stuff.
I had a question, I guess, for you both, really, was whether there were tools embedded in these wikis to help you with the process of creation. The example I was thinking about was when you have to make up names. I know that there are tools that will use Markov chains or something to give you nice, pronounceable, candidate random names. Do you do you have tools like that?
It's interesting you bring that up because that's actually basically where I was going to go next. Is so I'm actually built this tool, which is just a name generator over here, and so I've got a list of, if I look at like dwarf female names, I can see it's just grabbing a bunch of them and pulling them together. If I go look at my more list here, I've got, let's see, here we go. No, yes. So this is name generator dwarf male, and it's got a template that goes along with it, and I've just got fields down here that are list fields with all the different possible I would use Markov chains perhaps, or just use full filled names, and I'm just basically shuffling all those names and then taking a subset of them and putting them together.
And what about you, Reece? Do you have anything like that?
That is something that I have not yet put in my wiki, but just before you joined, when Matt and I were talking, that's something that I'm probably going to steal from his wiki and put into mine, because that's for as far as names go for characters, that's something that I fluster myself with sometimes, just coming up with names on the spot. I'm good with location names. I can usually come up with that stuff.
I've got some.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry, I was interrupting you thanks to the terrible delays. I was just going to say, okay. I've got some software, well, a little algorithm that does Markov chain name generation, which I've used over the years to generate company names for when I've needed to make companies. And I have always wanted to build that into a TiddlyWiki plugin, but wasn't really certain what its purpose would be, but it's maybe we've found it. But that's really cool. Do either of you, another question for you both, was whether either of you use maps at all?
I'll go ahead and stop sharing so that you can.
Yes, that is a good question. I've got something that I implemented relatively recently with using TiddlyMap, which is a plugin by Felix, whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head. That is a delightful implementation. So I created this map in an image editor that I will not really go over right now. But TiddlyMap is a mapping software that's usually used for like idea mapping, like connecting nodes together.
Yeah.
In this case, I've used.
Amazing.
Yeah. Let me go full screen. Yeah. So I made all this whole thing. It took me a lot of time to create in an image editor, but I'll scroll down to how I kind of use this at my table. So here's a bunch of different locations on my map. Some of them I have linked, some of them I don't, but these are all different nodes in TiddlyMap. And basically these connect to the locations. I also have a little one for my players so I can keep track of where they are in my world. So at the table when I'm running and keeping track of things, I'll zoom down to where the players are. And if I need to know in a location where they're going, I'll open this up. It will take me to the location, and then it will give me, the brief description of kind of what's going on there.
And just to show, if you can perhaps show people, as I understand it, if you moved the map away and then clicked on that icon at the top of Splitway, it would move the map back to bring it back into view, isn't that right?
Yeah, so if I'm scrolled down here and I'm talking about like a particular character or whatever, if I'm talking about Jeremy Ruston again, I double click this, it will take me back to Splitway. These nodes link directly to the location or whatever the tiddler is that has that name. and they're all styled according to, however I want to style them. I haven't populated too many because I just got this to work like probably 3 weeks ago. This image in the background is externally loaded because it's enormous. It's a 4K map. So it increased my load times quite a bit when I had loaded it in locally. So ever since then, and after I ported to 5.1.22, I've started using this again to get a better idea of what I'm looking at and the locations in my world. And this is actually not the only one I have. I also have a more focused political map of a specific section of the world that I use to keep track of different states in a particular nation, basically. That's something that I would also populate with all of the different city names. So these are all locations eventually that I would populate and have a tiddler for and keep track of.
And would you print out these maps for the players?
I share them via Google Drive. I'll upload them and send them over. That's why that's why this one. Let's see. Let me pull back my main map. That's why this one has labels that aren't the tiddlers, because this actual image is something that I would share with the players, and I'm superimposing the nodes on top of the locations.
It looks great, I must say. So I've never seen Tiddly map with a background image before, but it really does look very good.
Yeah, it's not exactly what it was intended for, but it's super useful for me because I like having spatial awareness and figuring out like where the players are. For instance, each one of these hexes that you can see on here, that's 4 days of travel on foot. So for me, time is super important. So I like to keep track of what day it is for my players, how much food they have, that sort of thing, in order to be able to pal around the map and get to different places.
It's interesting because he was showing this to me right before we got started, and I'm about to steal it from him, but I ended up trying to write something similar. I'm going to go ahead and share screen as well, and kind of show when I tried to write something up, I ended up putting something together, and this was just a very simple image. But what I ended up doing with it was trying to put together the ability to kind of filter things. I could show which icons I wanted based on what quest people were working on, so I could kind of keep track of like what they were actually doing, or everywhere that they could go to, and have those all be links to where they needed to go.
Is it SVG or the?
This is not actually an SVG. I want to upgrade it to be an SVG.
How are you? What is the image? I guess is it?
So let's see. Did I do it in here? Okay. So if I go look at, for example, Grishnag, this location that I've got, on it I have a left and a top percentage value, which is just basically the percentage it's supposed to be across this image, because at the time I was working on this, which was several years ago, I wasn't able to figure out how to embed actual links inside of a SVG image. So I think I saw recently that we got the ability to do links inside of SVGs, and so I need to come back and retouch this.
I've used it on a recent project, and it's really fun. Now that when I started playing with SVG, browser support wasn't that good, but now that it's everywhere, it's a marvelous thing. It'd be I want to ask now if there's anything left that you'd like to show, because we'll draw slowly towards the close. Now,
ridiculous.
When you flashed it up earlier, this looked fascinating, but I kind of wanted it to be a world with 13 months in the year instead.
Mine doesn't have that, but
you put one of them on a world like whichever it is, Venus, where the day is longer than the year, and that would really confuse people's calendars.
The easiest way to keep track of lunar cycles is to just make it akin to Earth. But I did want to have different months. So recently I created, let me pull this up so I can show you guys. Recently I created a way to keep track of my calendar in game. Pardon?
Yeah.
So
I was sort of joking. The TiddlyWiki translation that translated the date formats to to your month names.
Yeah, that's actually basically what it does. So I have a few different things in here. My month calendar here, so that shows me how many days are in a month, how many months are here. It tells me how many days are in a year, so this can actually be edited. If I wanted to have more months or add more months, then I could do that. I just don't, because that's.
And the 365 would up.
Sorry, you cut out again.
Yeah, and I fear that we might have a few gaps in the sound to paper over in post-production. Now, I was wondering if you did change the number of days, whether the days in year automatically updated itself. I think you said it did.
Yeah, it does. So if I edited this to 32 days, then you can see that automatically updates there, which is a nice touch.
So I guess
my favorite
you both make use of the new math operators.
Yeah, so my favorite thing that I've done here so far is I've allowed a way to calculate dates based on a current date and as well as characters' ages. So I'll go back to the one that I created here. The current year is listed here. It's the 28th of Lays, 1059. This is an American month, day, year instead of day, month, year. And so you can see I put in 8/28, 1059. That's the current date as of like the time that my players are playing at. And I can set, so if I set a birthday here, I'm just going to type in 11 10. Oops. So if I put in 11/10/20, that would calculate the age for me automatically. And then I can tell if I increase the date, it's going to tell me how old this character is. So I was very charitable and I made you 39. But the other nice thing about this is when I click this link, it automatically generates for the date. So I can reference back to if something happens on a particular date, I can do that. And a step beyond that, let's see, I think it's I have to remember where I put this stuff. There we go. So I have some characters that are a little bit older, and I also have a way of keeping track of ages in relation to two different events. So in this particular case, I just went like 5 steps down. This was a historical event that I keep track of in my world. And in here, I have some macros that allow me to tell how old a character was on an input date. So Arundus Centaurum, this character here, he tells me how old this macro tells me how old he was on 10/15, 10/33. So that displays in here after rendering.
Yeah.
And I kind of implement that stuff over and over again, to keep track of time for that info.
That's absolutely amazing. I wanted to ask you, it looks, Reece, as if you're using Tiddly
Oh,
Desktop.
yes, I am.
Right?
I'm running locally. I don't use Node, so I'm pulling off of a local HTML file.
And you don't customize Tiddly Desktop?
No, I have not gotten into anything beyond just editing my TiddlyWiki. I just learned not too long ago how to customize stuff in TiddlyWiki a little bit more. I was not a coder prior to using TiddlyWiki. I taught myself SQL after learning wiki text, actually. So that's been kind of my gateway into learning some development stuff.
Oh, it's really cool. It's one of the as you were saying at the beginning about learning. Oh no, sorry, it was Matt. I think actually was saying that you'd got into JavaScript programming through TiddlyWiki.
That's right.
And it's always nice when TiddlyWiki's act as a sort of gateway drug to draw people deeper into the world of programming that I've always enjoyed so much and want to share so much. So yeah, that makes me very happy.
Yeah, JavaScript is next on my list because I'm getting to the point where I can't do things that I want to do in wiki text.
Well, it is one of the TiddlyWiki's highest goals is to serve the needs of people who want to make stuff without forcing everybody to become a software developer. So there's a kind of a tension. On the one hand, it's always really cool when TiddlyWiki helps to pull people along in a sort of the technology education that they want. But on the other hand, I really relish having users who won't touch JavaScript. Because the goal of TiddlyWiki is to try and keep narrowing that gap so that you can do what the goal of more cases as possible. But then, having said that, your motivation, you've got a very ambitious system already. And I also wanted to just double check that, which is, if I understood, well, is it a commercial version of what you're using TiddlyWiki for? Is that a way of looking at it?
Yeah, there's a it's called World Anvil. It's a subscription service that you can go to that is essentially an online wiki service, more or less, that you can publish publicly. I used it for about a month, and sorry, I used it for about a month prior to using TiddlyWiki.
Oh, you cut out. You used it for a month.
Yeah, so I used it for about a month when I was first starting to get into running games again about a year and a half ago, and it frustrated me to the point that it didn't have like the features that I wanted, and I also didn't want to pay for it monthly. So I ended up finding TiddlyWiki on recommendation of a friend. And since then, about a year and a half ago, was when I started getting into creating what you see.
That's really cool. I kind of I'm glad that there is a business, that somebody's found a business model around this. But I think what you're describing, both of you, is something. It's hard to imagine a single product that could serve the needs of 1,000 different versions of you, if you see what I mean, because there's so many differences, even that emerge in this very superficial conversation between your two needs. So and that's always, to me, the weakness of a commercial service is it can't support the range of different configurations that TiddlyWiki can.
Yeah, it's funny. Even in the
I think we might have lost sound. I don't know if you lost me there. We'll see what eventually gets picked up by the thing. Matt, Reece, I was going to draw things to a close now, but go on.
Sorry, I think there's a really bad delay.
Sorry, Reece, you go on.
It must be like 15 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's probably my Wi-Fi. It's terrible Wi-Fi sometimes. Yeah, it's bouncing back to the 19th century.
We are ready to draw things to a close. Stop.
Let's draw to a close. So, and I don't know whether this is actually going to be recorded, but maybe we'll have to do it twice. Yes, no, exactly. It keeps. I can see on the other machine that it's a terrible, terrible signal. But Matt, thank you very much for joining me today. I'm sure everybody who's watched this will have many further questions and would like to see much more, but it's a wonderful taste to see how TiddlyWiki can help in a world that many of us with, and yet all I see are echoes of how I and other people use TiddlyWiki all the time. So it's really great to get that insight. And thank you very much for sharing with us.
Yeah, it was a delight. It was great talking to you guys.